My neighbor Dorothy knocked on my door at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning. I know because I checked my watch out of habit, and the look on her face told me everything before she opened her mouth. "Frank," she said quietly, "those kids haven't been outside in 5 days. I'd noticed it too. I just hadn't wanted to believe what I was noticing. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 72 years old. I spent 22 years in the United States Army, most of it in military intelligence, and I retired as a master sergeant in 2004 with a pension, a bronze star I keep in a shoebox, and a discipline for observation that never fully turned off. I bought my house in 1998, a solid 3-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, and I have lived in it alone since my wife Patricia passed from pancreatic cancer 6 years ago. I tell you all of this because the story I'm about to share is not the story of a naive old man who got taken advantage of. It is the story of a man who loved his daughter more than his instincts and paid for it. And then, eventually, the story of how those instincts came back online quietly, methodically, and did what they were trained to do. Sandra is my only child. She was born in 1981, which makes her 43 years old now. She was sharp as a girl, curious, funny, a little headstrong. Patricia and I gave her everything we could. She went to community college, studied business, got married at 26 to a man named Derek who I genuinely liked. They had 2 children, Marcus, who is now 9, and Lily, who just turned 7. For a long time, things seemed fine. Sandra and Derek lived about 40 minutes from me. I'd see the grandkids on holidays and birthdays, occasionally on weekends. After Patricia died, Sandra called more often, came by more often. That closeness felt earned, and I was grateful for it. Then, about 18 months ago, the marriage started to crack. I didn't get all the details. Sandra wasn't the type to air her grievances, at least not to me, but by last spring she and Derek were separated and she told me a divorce was coming. "I just need somewhere to land, Dad," she told me over the phone in April. "Just for a few months while I figure things out. I hate to ask, but I don't have anywhere else to go." She had $3,000 in her account, she said. Couldn't afford the deposit on an apartment with 2 kids in tow. Derek was being difficult about child support. She'd take the 2 extra bedrooms, one for her, one she'd share with Marcus and Lily, and she'd contribute to groceries and utilities while she got back on her feet. I said yes without hesitation. She was my daughter. Marcus and Lily were my blood. What was I going to say? She moved in on a Saturday in early May. The first few weeks were fine, better than fine, actually. Having the house full of life again was a comfort I hadn't expected. Lily would climb into my lap after dinner to watch nature documentaries. Marcus helped me in the garden on weekends. Sandra seemed tired but functional. She was working from home doing some kind of freelance bookkeeping, she said, and she spent long hours on her laptop at the kitchen table. I asked about the work once. She said it was just invoicing and accounts management for small businesses. I didn't push further. Sandra had always been private about her professional life. The first thing I noticed that didn't sit right was the deliveries. It started in June. Packages, medium to large, heavy cardboard boxes, began arriving 2 or 3 times a week, always addressed to Sandra, always from what looked like commercial distribution companies. When I asked what they were, she said it was supplies for a side venture she was building, an e-commerce resale business, she explained, buying surplus goods wholesale and reselling them online. It made enough sense that I didn't question it further, but I noted it. The second thing I noticed was the visitors. They came in the evening mostly. Men I didn't recognize, usually 1 at a time, sometimes 2. They didn't ring the doorbell, they texted Sandra and she let them in through the side door off the kitchen. They never stayed long, 30 minutes, maybe 40. Sandra always introduced them, if she introduced them at all, as business contacts or partners in the resale thing. I'm a military intelligence veteran. When I see a pattern, I don't file it away as coincidence. But Sandra was my daughter, and I told myself, she's building something, she's entrepreneurial. Not everyone who runs a side hustle has a conventional setup. The third thing I noticed was the attic. My attic is accessed through a door at the end of the upstairs hallway. It's a large space. The previous owners framed it out into something almost usable, with good flooring and decent headroom. Patricia and I used it for storage. Holiday decorations, boxes of the kids' old clothes I never got around to donating, 2 military duffel bags, a broken lamp I kept meaning to fix. In June, Sandra asked if she could use part of it for overflow storage from her resale inventory. I said of course. I showed her the pull-down stairs and told her to feel free. By July, I noticed the attic door was closed more often than not. I didn't think much of it. By August, it was locked. Not with the latch, with a padlock. A heavy-duty combination padlock that Sandra had mounted on a hasp screwed directly into my door frame. I stood in that hallway for a long moment looking at that lock. When I came downstairs and asked Sandra about it, she was easy and relaxed about it. "Sorry, Dad, I should have mentioned it. I've got some higher-value inventory up there, cameras, electronics, and I'm paranoid about the kids getting into it and breaking something. I'll take the lock off once I move the fragile stuff to the storage unit I'm renting." I nodded. I said okay, but I checked the door frame where she'd screwed the hasp. Those were 3-inch lag bolts. You don't put 3-inch lag bolts in a door frame to keep your 7-year-old away from bubble-wrapped cameras. Dorothy's Tuesday morning visit was the moment my patience ran out. Those kids haven't been outside in 5 days, she said. It was true. I had been away for the better part of a week visiting an old army buddy, Ray, in Columbus. When I left, the grandkids were playing in the backyard as usual. When I came back Sunday evening, the house was quiet in a way that felt different. Sandra said the kids had colds and were resting. I accepted that, but Dorothy's 70-years-old former schoolteacher, not a woman given to drama, had been watching. They came out once, she said. Friday afternoon for maybe 20 minutes. That little girl looked pale. Frank, the boy, kept looking at the upstairs window. I thanked Dorothy. I closed the door and stood in my own kitchen for a long time. Then I went upstairs and listened at the attic door. I heard movement, small, careful movement. And then Lily's voice, a child's whisper, paper-thin and careful, saying something I couldn't quite catch. I spoke through the door. Lily, Marcus, it's Grandpa. Silence, then Marcus, Grandpa. It's me, buddy, are you okay up there? A pause, then, Grandpa, Mommy said if we talk to anyone, something bad might happen to you. I put my hand flat against that door. 22 years of army discipline, and I felt it drain out of me in about 3 seconds. What was left wasn't panic, it was colder than panic. It was the thing that comes after panic, the thing that makes you move. I'm going to get the 2 of you out of there right now, I said quietly. Don't be scared. I called a locksmith. He came within the hour. I told him it was my house, showed him the deed I keep in the fireproof box in my bedroom closet, and he had the padlock off in under 4 minutes. When I opened that door and climbed those pull-down stairs, Marcus and Lily were sitting on the floor near the small attic window with 2 blankets and a box of crackers. They were pale. They were scared, but they were physically unharmed. I held them both for a long time without saying anything. Marcus, 9 years old enough to understand that something was very wrong, pressed his face against my shoulder and didn't cry. He just held on. Lily cried enough for both of them. I should tell you what else was in that attic, because it's the part of this story that took my daughter from a troubled woman, making bad choices, to something I hadn't let myself imagine. The back 2/3 of the space had been curtained off with heavy black plastic sheeting. Behind it were folding tables, and on those tables were scales, vacuum-sealed bags, heat sealers, rows of small amber prescription bottles and cardboard boxes, dozens of them, labeled with product names I recognized as legitimate supplement brands. The bottles inside were not supplements. I had spent years in Army intelligence working adjacent to drug interdiction operations in the 1990s. I knew what I was looking at. The amber bottles contained pills, pressed tablets, uniform in size and color. That were not what the relabeled bottles claimed they were. My daughter had turned my attic into a repackaging and distribution operation. She wasn't cooking anything. There was no lab equipment, no precursors, no chemicals being synthesized. What she was running was a repackaging hub. Bulk illicit product came in, got broken down, repackaged into legitimate-looking bottles, and went back out through her business contacts and e-commerce channels. It was organized, clean, and had clearly been running for months. I stood there for 60 seconds. I counted them. Then I took out my phone and took photographs of everything I could see: the tables, the bottles, the labels, the sealed bags, the cardboard boxes, with the shipping addresses, before I touched a single thing. Then I took my grandchildren downstairs, put them in my car, and drove to Derek's apartment. Derek opened his door with the look of a man who'd stopped being surprised by disasters. When he saw the kids, his face collapsed with relief in a way that confirmed what I already suspected. He had been trying to find them. Sandra had told him she was taking the kids to visit a friend in another state. She'd been non-communicative for over a week. He'd been consulting a family attorney. Are they okay? He asked. Physically, yes, I said. Keep them here, don't call Sandra yet. I'll explain everything in a few days when I know more. He looked at me steadily. Frank, what did you find? Enough, I said. I'm going to handle it. I drove home, parked down the street, and sat in my car. Sandra was gone. The house was dark when I drove past. I didn't know how much time I had before she realized I'd been in the attic, before she found the padlock missing, before she understood that I knew. I pulled out my phone and called Ray. Ray Gutierrez and I served together for 11 years in the Army. After he retired, he spent 15 years as a federal law enforcement liaison working with DEA task forces before retiring a second time to Columbus with his wife. He was the most methodically calm human being I had ever known, and he was the only person I trusted with what I'd found. He picked up on the second ring I described what I'd seen. There was a long silence, then Ray said, "Don't touch anything else, don't confront her, don't call the local police yet, I need to make a call first." She had the kids in there, Ray. My grandkids were sleeping 20 feet from that operation. I know, he said. That makes it worse for her and better for you. Give me 2 hours. Ray called back in 90 minutes. He'd reached a contact at the DEA regional field office covering my state. They had apparently been running a parallel investigation into a pill repackaging and distribution network operating out of residential addresses in several Midwestern cities. They had not yet identified all the distribution points in the network. My address was on a list they'd been building. They hadn't moved on it because they were building toward the top of the network, not the bottom. Sandra, it emerged over the following days, was not the top. She was a mid-level node. She'd been recruited, Ray's contact explained carefully, through her e-commerce business contacts about 14 months ago. She was paid in cash to receive shipments, repackage them and distribute through a combination of in-person handoffs and mail fulfillment orders disguised as legitimate online sales. She had used my address, my house, and my grandchildren as cover. The reason she'd moved in, I now understood, had nothing to do with her divorce or her lack of funds. It had to do with my house. A veteran grandfather's home on a quiet residential street. Consistent neighbors, no suspicious profile, a perfect front. I sat with that information for a long time. The DEA moved faster than I expected, though they insisted on doing things their way and on their timeline. Ray coached me through every step. I was asked to return to my house and behave normally. I was asked not to confront Sandra, not to give any indication that I knew what I knew. I was asked to allow a technical team to access the property briefly, under the guise of a utilities visit, to document the attic operation more thoroughly. I agreed to all of it, living in that house for the next 10 days with Sandra moving around downstairs, making coffee in my kitchen, watching television on my couch, knowing what I knew was the hardest thing I had done since burying Patricia. Sandra noticed the grandkids were gone, of course. She told me Derek had called and she'd agreed to a short visit to keep the peace. She seemed nervous but not panicked. I watched her carefully. She was good at the surface, bright, conversational, keeping up the performance of a daughter living temporarily with her father, but I'd been trained to read people. And underneath the performance I saw a person who was managing several simultaneous crises and keeping each one in a separate compartment. I asked her once obliquely how the business was going. Really picking up, actually, she said. I might be able to get my own place sooner than I thought. That's great, I said. On the 8th day she asked me something that told me she was accelerating her timeline. Dad, I know this is a strange ask, but would you consider adding me to the title of the house, just as a co-owner? I've been talking to a financial advisor and apparently having property equity would help me qualify for a low-interest loan to get my business properly capitalized. I kept my face completely neutral. That's something I'd need to think about, I said carefully, and talk to my attorney about. She nodded, smiled, moved on, but I saw the calculation behind it. She wasn't just using my house as an operational base. She was positioning to eventually own it. A co-ownership claim would complicate any future legal action against her related to the property. It would muddy the waters about what she knew and what she'd authorized. It might even, in some scenarios, give her grounds to contest a forced sale or seizure. I called Ray that night and told him about the conversation. He called his contact. They moved up the timeline. 3 days later at 6:47 in the morning, I was sitting in my car down the block, as I had been instructed to be, when 4 federal vehicles and 2 local police units pulled up in front of my house. I had been told to stay in my car. I stayed in my car. I watched them go in through the front door. Sandra had answered, apparently thinking it was something routine, and had been handcuffed in the entryway before she could reach her phone. The technical team was in the attic within minutes. Sandra was walked to a federal vehicle in handcuffs at 7:22 in the morning. She was wearing her robe. She looked small in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. As the agent guided her into the vehicle, she turned and looked down the street, not at anything specific, just looking, and I don't know if she saw my car or not. I sat there until the last vehicle had gone. Then I drove back to my house. A federal evidence team was inside for most of the day. A young agent named Tors, sharp, professional, not unkind, sat with me in my kitchen for 2 hours asking me questions and walking me through the process. He explained what had been seized from the attic, approximately 14,000 pills in various stages of repackaging, scales, sealing equipment, a laptop, and detailed records of distribution contacts. He also explained carefully that my cooperation had been noted and that I was not considered a subject of the investigation in any capacity. I know, I said. It was my house. He looked at me with the measured expression of someone who dealt with difficult situations regularly. A lot of people in your position would have confronted her directly, sir, tipped her off, given her time to move the operation. That would have been the emotional response, I said. Yes, sir. I'm 72 years old. I stopped leading with emotion about 40 years ago. Sandra was charged with conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, operating a drug distribution network, and child endangerment. The child endangerment charge came from the grandkids being housed in proximity to the operation. Marcus and Lily had been in that attic, evidence established, on multiple occasions when active packaging was underway. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case is ongoing. Derek has temporary sole custody of Marcus and Lily, which the family court judge granted within a week of Sandra's arrest based on the circumstances. I see them every weekend. Marcus is doing better in school than he was in the spring. Lily has started sleeping through the night again. I've had the attic emptied, the walls repainted, and the hasp removed from the door frame. I filled the screw holes with wood putty and sanded them smooth. Some nights I stand at the bottom of the pull-down stairs for a moment before going to bed. Not because I'm haunted by what happened there, though I am a little, but because I need to remember what it felt like to put my hand against that door and hear my grandson's voice. That's the thing that keeps me methodical. That's the thing that keeps the discipline from becoming callousness. People ask me how I feel about Sandra now. It's a question I've spent a lot of time with. I don't feel what I expected to feel. I expected rage or grief or the kind of betrayal that scours you clean of everything you thought you knew about a person. I've felt pieces of all of those things, but the dominant feeling when I'm honest with myself is something closer to sorrow, not for what she did to me, for what she did to herself, for the choices that preceded the choices that led her to my attic, for the version of my daughter that existed before the calculation took over. I grew up in a military household. My father was a Korean War veteran, a man of deep silences and unshakable principles. He used to say, the mission doesn't care about your feelings, but the man behind the mission should. He meant that effectiveness requires emotional control, but that emotional control without moral feeling is just cruelty with better posture. I tried to be that kind of man. I tried to be that kind of father. I don't know where it went wrong with Sandra. I have a list of theories I've been constructing since May. Gaps in her childhood I might have addressed differently. Years when I was deployed, and Patricia handled everything alone, a quality in Sandra that I may have mistaken for confidence and was actually something more fractured underneath. I don't know. The army taught me that honest after-action review is the only way to learn, so I do the review, but I try not to confuse the review with self-punishment. I did not put illegal pills in my attic. I did not lock my grandchildren in a room to preserve an operation. Those choices were hers. What I want to say to anyone watching or listening to this who might be in a similar place, who might be watching a family member and feeling that slow accumulation of things that don't quite add up, is this: trust the accumulation, not any single thing. A single padlock on an attic door means nothing. One unfamiliar visitor means nothing. One delivery, one vague explanation, one locked room means nothing. But the accumulation, the pattern, that's the signal. I spent 22 years learning to read patterns in situations where being wrong meant people got hurt. I got soft in my own home. I let love do what it does, which is smooth over the rough edges of what you're seeing, give explanations the benefit of the doubt, protect your feelings at the expense of your clarity. It cost my grandchildren 5 days in an attic. It won't cost them anything again. I can promise them that. The last time I spoke to Sandra was through her attorney, who passed along a brief message. She said she was sorry. She said she had been in a situation she couldn't see a way out of. She said she never meant for Marcus and Lily to be frightened. I sent a message back through the attorney. I said, I know you believe all of that. I know that somewhere in you think the love and the operation could coexist. That's what I grieve most, that you thought those things could share the same roof. They couldn't. They can't. It's November now. The house is quiet in the way it was before Sandra moved in, the good kind of quiet, the kind you fill with your own rhythms instead of borrowed noise. Saturday mornings, Derek drops Marcus and Lily off at 9 o'clock. Marcus has gotten interested in chess. I played a lot in the army and he beats me more often than I let on. Lily has decided she wants to learn to bake. Last weekend she made brownies, mostly by herself, with flour on her nose and a level of focused concentration that reminded me sharply of Patricia. I stood in my kitchen doorway watching her measure out the cocoa powder, and I thought, this is the mission, this right here. The thing I was protecting when I didn't confront Sandra early and blow the whole investigation. The thing I was protecting when I stayed in that car down the street instead of walking up to my own front door. These 2 kids, safe in my kitchen on a Saturday morning. Every hard thing I've done in my life, every deployment, every silence in the middle of difficult years, every disciplined choice I made when the emotional choice was right there within reach, it all ends here. In a kitchen, with flour on a little girl's nose. That's enough for me. That's more than enough.